The emergency room doors swung open with force as Natalia Brooks rushed through the white corridors of Memorial Grace Hospital. Her shift had started 3 hours ago, but the chaos of Friday night had kept her running between rooms without a moment to breathe. She adjusted her navy scrubs and tied her dark hair into a practical ponytail as she made her way to the neurology wing on the 4th floor. Room 412 was her next stop. A stroke patient who had been admitted that afternoon needed constant monitoring through the night. Natalia checked the chart outside the door. Thomas Hayes, 72 years old, stable condition but requiring careful observation. She knocked gently before entering, expecting to find an elderly man sleeping peacefully after his medication. Instead, she found someone else entirely. A man stood by the window, his silhouette framed against the city lights below. He was tall, with broad shoulders that carried the weight of obvious worry. His white dress shirt was wrinkled, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, and his dark hair looked like he had run his hands through it 100 times. When he turned at the sound of her entrance, Natalia felt her breath catch in her throat. His eyes were the deepest shade of blue she had ever seen, not the bright blue of summer skies, but the rich, dark blue of the ocean at midnight. Those eyes found hers and held them with an intensity that made her forget why she had walked into the room. Breaking the silence. "Good evening," Natalia managed to say, her professional voice steadier than she felt. "I am Nurse Brooks. I will be taking care of Mr. Hayes tonight." The man stepped forward into the light, and Natalia could see his face more clearly. Strong jaw, lips pressed into a thin line of concern, and those eyes that seemed to see right through her. He looked exhausted but alert, like he had been running on pure willpower for hours. "Vincent Hayes," he said, his voice deep and rich. "Thomas is my father." He extended his hand, and when Natalia took it, she felt warmth spread through her palm up to her arm. His grip was firm but gentle, lasting just a second longer than a normal handshake. She pulled her hand back quickly, busying herself with checking the monitors beside the bed. "Your father is doing well," she said, focusing on the numbers on the screen. "The medication is working and his vitals are stable. The doctor expects good recovery if he continues like this." Vincent moved closer, standing on the opposite side of the bed. Natalia could feel his presence like heat from a fire. She kept her eyes on her patient, checking his pulse, adjusting his pillow, doing everything she had done 1,000 times before. But this time felt different. Every movement felt watched, every breath felt noticed. "Thank you," Vincent said quietly, "for being here, for taking care of him." Natalia looked up then, meeting those blue eyes again. There was genuine gratitude there, mixed with fear and hope. She recognized that look. She had seen it on the faces of countless family members who waited through long nights, praying for their loved ones to get better. "It is my job," she said softly, "but also my privilege. Your father seems like a strong man." Vincent smiled then, just a small curve of his lips, but it transformed his entire face. The worry lines around his eyes softened, and Natalia saw a glimpse of who he might be when life was not filled with hospital rooms and medical emergencies. The long night begins. Natalia finished her examination and made notes on her tablet. She explained the medication schedule to Vincent, telling him when his father would need the next dose and what symptoms to watch for. He listened carefully, asking intelligent questions that showed he genuinely wanted to understand. "You should go home and rest," Natalia suggested. "Visiting hours ended long ago. I will be here all night watching over him." Vincent shook his head. "I cannot leave him alone. Not tonight." There was something in his voice that stopped Natalia from arguing. She understood that need to stay, to keep watch, to somehow protect the people you loved through sheer presence alone. "Then I will bring you some coffee," she offered. "The machine down the hall makes terrible coffee, but it keeps you awake." "That sounds perfect," Vincent said, and there was that small smile again. Natalia left the room, her heart beating faster than it should. She stood in the hallway for a moment, pressing her palm against the cool wall. This was ridiculous.
She had been a nurse for 6 years. She had met hundreds of family members, comforted them, supported them, and never once felt this strange pull in her chest. "Get yourself together," she thought. "He is just another worried son, and you are just doing your job." But when she returned with 2 cups of coffee and found Vincent sitting in the chair beside his father's bed, his head bowed and his shoulders sagging with exhaustion, something inside her shifted. She wanted to comfort him, to tell him everything would be okay, to smooth away the worry lines on his forehead. She handed him the coffee without a word. Their fingers touched briefly as he took the cup, and Natalia felt that electric spark again. Vincent must have felt it too, because his eyes widened slightly before he looked away. Conversations in darkness. The hospital grew quieter as midnight approached. Natalia came back to check on Thomas every hour, and each time Vincent was still there. They started talking in whispers, careful not to wake the sleeping patient. Small talk, at first. Safe topics. The weather, the hospital, the city below. But gradually the conversations grew deeper. Vincent told her about his business, a chain of boutique hotels he had built from nothing. He spoke about his father with love and respect, sharing stories from his childhood. He mentioned a difficult divorce that had ended 6 months ago, his voice going flat when he touched on that subject. Natalia found herself sharing too, more than she usually did with strangers. She told her about why she became a nurse, about her grandmother who had spent her final days in a hospital much like this one. She spoke about the satisfaction she felt when a patient recovered, when families were reunited, when she could make a difference in someone's darkest hour. As dawn began to paint the sky outside the window, Natalia realized she had spent more time in room 412 than any of her other patients. She had neglected her rounds, something she never did. But sitting there in the quiet darkness, talking to Vincent Hayes, felt more important than following the usual routine. When her shift finally ended at 7 in the morning, Natalia felt strange about leaving. Vincent stood when she gathered her things, and they faced each other across the room. "Thank you," he said again, "for everything, not just the medical care, but for the company, for making this night bearable." "You are welcome," Natalia replied, and she meant it more than any other time she had said those words. As she walked out of the room, she could feel his eyes following her, and she knew with absolute certainty that this was not the last time they would meet. Thomas Hayes would need care for weeks, maybe months, and Vincent Hayes looked like the kind of man who would be there every night. Natalia wasn't sure if that thought filled her with anticipation or fear. Maybe both.
Natalia told herself she would treat room 412 like any other patient assignment. She had 3 days off after that first night. 3 days where she tried not to think about dark blue eyes and that deep voice that seemed to resonate in her chest. 3 days where she almost convinced herself that the connection she felt had been nothing more than exhaustion and the emotional atmosphere of a hospital at night. But when she returned for her Monday shift, her heart raced as she climbed the stairs to the 4th floor. She checked her reflection in a window, smoothing her hair and adjusting her scrubs. Then she caught herself and stopped. This was unprofessional. This was wrong. Vincent Hayes was the family member of a patient, nothing more. She pushed open the door to room 412 and found Thomas awake, sitting up slightly in bed. His color looked better, and there was life in his eyes that had been absent that first night. And beside him, in that same chair, sat Vincent. He looked up when she entered, and his face transformed with a smile that made her knees weak. "Nurse Brooks," he said, and the way he spoke her name felt intimate somehow. "My father has been asking about you." Thomas turned his head slowly, his movements still careful and measured. "The angel who saved my life," he said, his words slightly slurred but understandable. "Vincent has not stopped talking about you." Natalia felt heat rise to her cheeks. She moved to the bed, focusing on her patient and not on the man watching her every move. "Mr. Hayes, it is wonderful to see you awake and talking. How are you feeling today?" For the next 20 minutes, she performed her examination, asking questions and making notes. Thomas was improving faster than expected, his speech clearer and his movement better. It was exactly the kind of progress that made her job worthwhile. but she was constantly aware of Vincent's presence, the way he leaned forward when she spoke, the way his eyes followed her around the room. When she finished, Thomas closed his eyes to rest, and Vincent followed her out into the hallway. The coffee ritual. "Coffee?" Vincent asked, and Natalia found herself nodding before she could think better of it. They walked to the small break room at the end of the hall, a space usually empty at this late hour. Vincent operated the machine with familiar ease, preparing 2 cups exactly how they had drunk them that first night. 2 sugars for her, black for him. They sat at the small table by the window, and for a moment neither spoke. The silence was comfortable, not awkward, filled with things unsaid but understood. "I was worried you might not be working tonight," Vincent finally said, wrapping his hands around his cup. Natalia looked at him, surprised by his honesty. "I work Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, unless there's an emergency." "Good," he said, then seemed to realize how that sounded. "I mean, good for my father. He has been talking about you constantly. I think you made quite an impression." "He seems like a wonderful man," Natalia said, choosing her words carefully. "You were lucky to have him." Vincent's expression grew serious. "I did not always appreciate that. I spent so many years focused on building my business, traveling constantly, checking in by phone instead of visiting. When I got the call about his stroke, all I could think was, what if I had run out of time? What if I never got the chance to tell him how much he means to me?" The vulnerability in his voice touched something deep inside Natalia. She reached across the table without thinking, placing her hand over his. "But you did get that chance. He is recovering. You have time now." Vincent turned his hand over, his palm against hers, his fingers curling slightly around her hand. The touch sent electricity through her entire body. They sat like that for a long moment, hands joined, eyes locked, the rest of the world fading away. Then Natalia pulled back, reality crashing in. "I should check on my other patients," she said, standing quickly. But as she walked away, she could feel Vincent's gaze on her back, and she knew something had shifted between them, something that could not be easily undone. 3 weeks of growing closer. The pattern repeated itself over the following weeks. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, Natalia would find Vincent in room 412. Sometimes Thomas was awake, and the 3 of them would talk together. The older man had a sharp wit and loved to tell stories about Vincent's childhood, much to his son's embarrassment and Natalia's delight. But often, Thomas would be sleeping, and Natalia would find reasons to linger in the room. She would adjust monitors that didn't need adjusting, fluff pillows that were already perfect, check charts she had already reviewed. And Vincent would watch her with those blue eyes that seemed to see straight into her soul. Their coffee breaks became a ritual. Sometimes they talked about serious things like life and death and the fragility of human existence. Other times they discussed simple pleasures like favorite books or childhood memories. Vincent told her about growing up in this city, about his mother who had passed away 5 years ago, about building his first hotel from the ground up. Natalia shared stories about nursing school, about the patients who had touched her heart, about her dreams of maybe opening a care facility one day where people could receive medical attention in a more home-like environment. "You should do it," Vincent said, his voice full of conviction. "You would be amazing at that." "It takes money I do not have, and connections I will never have. It's just a dream." Vincent leaned forward, his intensity focused entirely on her. "Dreams are just plans waiting to happen. If you really want it, you'll find a way." The faith in his voice, the belief he had in her despite knowing her for such a short time, made Natalia's chest tight with emotion. No one had ever looked at her the way Vincent did, like she was capable of anything, like she mattered in ways that went beyond her profession. The almost kiss. It happened on a Wednesday night in the 4th week. Thomas had been moved to a regular room, no longer needing intensive monitoring. His recovery was progressing beautifully, and the doctors were talking about discharge within days. Natalia should have been happy about this. It meant her patient was healing. It meant she had done her job well. But it also meant she would have no reason to see Vincent anymore. She found him in the small chapel on the 2nd floor, a quiet...
Friday arrived too quickly, and not quickly enough. Natalia had spent the past 2 days in a state of nervous anticipation, replaying every conversation with Vincent in her mind. She had almost called in sick, almost asked another nurse to take her shift, but running away had never been her style, and she would not start now. When she arrived at the hospital, her supervisor caught her at the nurse's station. "Natalia, good news. Thomas Hayes is being discharged tomorrow morning instead of Sunday. His progress has been excellent, and Dr. Morrison cleared him to go home." Natalia felt her stomach drop. Tomorrow morning. That meant tonight was the last night, the last time she would have a professional reason to see Vincent. After tonight, everything would change. She made her rounds slowly, putting off room 412 until nearly midnight. When she finally pushed open the door, she found Thomas sitting up in bed, looking healthier than he had in weeks. His smile was bright and genuine when he saw her. "My favorite nurse," he said warmly, his speech almost completely clear now. Come in, come in. I have been waiting to thank you properly." Vincent stood from his chair, and their eyes met across the room. The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. He looked different tonight, wearing dark jeans and a simple sweater instead of his usual business attire. More relaxed, but somehow more dangerous to her peace of mind. "Mr. Hayes, you are looking wonderful," Natalia said, focusing on her patient. "I hear you get to go home tomorrow." "Thanks to you," Thomas said, reaching out to take her hand. "Vincent told me how you stayed with me that first night, how you fought to keep me stable when things looked bad. You saved my life, young lady." Natalia felt tears prick her eyes. "I was just doing my job." "No," Thomas said firmly, "you did more than that. You gave an old man hope. You gave my son someone to lean on during the hardest night of his life." He glanced at Vincent with a knowing smile. "And I think you gave him something else, too. Something he has been missing for a long time." The room fell silent. Natalia could feel Vincent watching her, could sense the unspoken questions hanging in the air. "I should check your vitals one last time," she said, pulling her hand gently from Thomas's grip. She went through the examination mechanically, her mind racing. This was it. After tonight, the decision would be hers to make. No more professional boundaries to hide behind, no more excuses, just her heart and her fear and the terrifying possibility of letting someone in. A father's wisdom. When she finished, Thomas looked at Vincent. "Son, why don't you walk Nurse Brooks to get some coffee? I'm tired and need to rest." It was clearly a dismissal and an obvious setup, but Natalia found herself following Vincent out into the hallway, her heart pounding with each step. They walked in silence to the break room. Vincent made their coffee with practiced ease, the ritual so familiar now it felt like coming home. They sat at their usual table, but tonight the air between them crackled with tension. "My father likes you," Vincent said finally. "I like him too. He's a good man. He raised a good son." Vincent smiled sadly. "I have not always been good. My marriage failed because I put work before everything else. I missed anniversaries, birthdays, important moments. I told myself I was building something for our future, but really I was just running away from intimacy, from vulnerability." He looked directly at Natalia, his blue eyes full of raw honesty. "Then I met you, and suddenly all those walls I built felt like prison bars. You made me want to be present, to be open, to take risks I swore I would never take again." Natalia's hands trembled around her coffee cup. "Vincent, I'm scared. I've been hurt before, too. I dated a doctor once, someone from a wealthy family. For a while, I thought maybe love could bridge our different worlds. But eventually, he wanted someone who could host dinner parties and attend charity galas, someone who fit his image of what a successful man's partner should be. I was just the nurse who worked nights and smelled like antiseptic." "I'm not him," Vincent said, quietly but firmly. "I know," Natalia whispered, "but what if knowing that isn't enough? What if we try this and it tears us both apart?" Vincent reached across the table, taking both her hands in his. "Then we'll hurt. We'll heal. We'll survive. But Natalia, what if we don't try? What if we walk away from this because we're afraid and we spend the rest of our lives wondering what could have been? Isn't that a worst kind of pain?" Before Natalia could answer, her pager went off again. But this time, it wasn't an emergency. It was a message from her supervisor asking her to come to the office. An unexpected opportunity. Natalia excused herself, confusion and dread mixing in her stomach. Had someone reported her for spending too much time with Vincent? Had she crossed some line without realizing it? But when she reached the supervisor's office, she found Dr. Morrison there as well, both of them smiling. "Natalia, sit down," her supervisor said warmly. "We've been discussing your work with Thomas Hayes. Dr. Morrison was particularly impressed with your care during the critical first 72 hours. You went above and beyond, the kind of attentive, compassionate care that makes the difference between adequate recovery and exceptional recovery." Natalia felt her relief wash over her. "Thank you. Mr. Hayes is a special patient." "We have a proposition for you," her supervisor continued. "We're opening a new wing dedicated to post-stroke rehabilitation. We need a head nurse for the night shift, someone who can train others and set the standard for patient care. The position comes with a significant raise and better hours. We'd like you to consider it." Natalia sat stunned. This was the kind of opportunity she had dreamed about, a leadership position, better pay, a chance to make a real difference in how patients were treated. "There's one condition," Dr. Morrison said. "We need someone who can start immediately, which means you'd be transitioning out of regular floor nursing. Your last shift would be tonight." Tonight, her last shift. The universe seemed to be